Oh snap, this beat is too hard, babe. I take lots of risks. I take shots and miss it. I'm not known for incompetence. In fact, it is quite the opposite. I shall out present for that 5%. Face consequence to build confidence. And I'm bound to fall, but I'm bound to rise. Just Father God and my entourage. I'm like Maharajas. Radio and Mags won't plug the God, but can't plug the Gaza. Go in the bar, then wonder why they aren't none the wiser. Never mind the fact that it's nothing like an act, so I don't rehearse. I'm like Samson in reverse. And boy, Sam made me into the introverts. I go hard. Don't follow me online, I gave energy to Dapple for a long time. Every morning I ignore one is an all kind, so if you're looking for the norm, you got the wrong guy. If you're looking for a fad, you got the wrong lad. And if you're looking for the same, you caught the wrong train. If you're looking for a hack, I'll never write back. But if you're looking for the champ, you found the right chap. And if you're looking for the ace, you're in the right place. He's a producer that tracks, you're on the right track. In fact, if you have any taste, you'll make a screw face and flavor you could never squeeze any spice rack. I'm safe in the space that I presently take up, and I prefer to live a dream rather than wake up. So when you pat me on the head, you better say duck or go hard.
The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D.
I soak in sun, breathe out sky. Boy scenes in the building. Now I much prefer to be outside. I have an inquiry in mind for the rookies and veterans, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever guy you know, 6'5", not at all menacing, as well versed in indigenous medicine. Been a while, learned a couple things about life in general. Been around, used to never wear jeans, jeans fit better now. Raving and ranting, I'm like Fred Hampton, chewing on rattlesnake planting. In other words, I go hard. I'm not scared to cry, I'm not scared to die. I'm not scared of heights. But I'm scared of trying, I'm scared of can't, and I'm scared of might. That's right, I cannot stand breathing air that's not rarefied. I like my media rare. I don't like anything medium rare fried. Bear in mind, try the other side and I couldn't bear it. Living with a barren mind, said goodbye. Praise divine that this brain of mine is on rain or shine. Keep that matter undermined, I will not be undermined. Write this down, then underline, I go hard.
The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D.
One more thing, some more string, theory, freshly matured, fresh chimichurri. Pets might leave cemeteries, would-be priests might leave seminary. I am my own judge and jury, what luxury. Without knowledge of the self, there is nothing more dreary than the universe of the 21st century. So, I do not worry, it is not at all necessary. I ain't back off of meat and dairy, think I might do it till I'm dead and buried. I'm not here to monitor commentary, I don't have time for the Tom and Jerry. Much to the contrary, I go hard. Harder still, I'm hard to kill. I go hard wearing big shoes, no one has a chance to fill. I go so hard, Congress tried to pass a bill. It didn't pass, but still. If you ever see me lay back and chill instead of going full blast, cause I haven't will. And I'd stop smell daffodils, okay, done. Let's have fun. Three's too much on account of one. Not go hard on account of what? That sounds dumb. Duh. Otherwise I'm bored. Let me be straightforward, let me keep this short. You can rest assured. I go hard.
The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D. The G, the O, the A, the A, the R, the D.
All right. Happy Tuesday morning. It's another Note to File Live. What's up, Dr. Fox?
Hey, Brad. How's it going, man?
Tired, always. But, hanging in there, man.
Yep. Turning green out there. I swear, I think the winters are getting shorter. I know that sounds like the old person in me, but I mean, there were like 2 weeks of ice and snow, and then it's back to windy green grass.
Yeah. We're getting a little bit of spring here. It's nice. Like 70.
I think the groundhog was wrong.
I'm not sure it's that scientific, but you
never know.
You never
Circadian rhythms, that's a thing.
But that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, man. Well, first of all, if you guys are watching, obviously leave comments. If you want to come on the show, feeling bold, shoot me a message. I'll hit you up with a link. Otherwise, you have to listen to us jabber about whatever comes to our minds. So that's on you. It's your fault at that point. So what's up, man? What do you got coming? I saw you're doing some speaking. You're going to be in Wisconsin.
So starting next week, I'm going to have a 6-week spurt of traveling. And I know a lot of people are going to be doing that. There's conferences coming. There's all kinds of things. I'll be going to up to Michigan to activate a site. Then I'll be going down to Houston for an activity. I'll be going to Texas, more like take like the Texas tour, back to Houston, back up to home, then up to Minneapolis, then back down, then to Madison, Wisconsin. So huge. But you're right. ACRP, April 18th, I think. ACRP in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're going to be having a talk. It's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be a follow-up on the ACRP webinar I gave last July. A lot of people loved it. They want more questions, so we're probably going to do some deep dives into some case studies for budget negotiations, like real life, maybe pull some emails, make them anonymous, case studies, so we can see what actually happens to our sites. And
yeah, if you need any additional ammunition, let me know, because man,
Yeah.
I feel like we hear the most insane things.
you know, seriously, if anyone wants to tell their story and they need to be anonymous about it, I've done that at CRPN before. You know, like they don't really want to get in trouble, so we make sure it's all anonymous, and then we just
Sure.
like clinical trials confidential, just make sure that the story's out there.
Yeah, I think we need more of that, and that's why I try to post that kind of stuff is when it happens, because I think it's really instructive, and it's always good to hear. It's not good to hear, but it's validating to hear other people hearing the same things, because there are times when I'm like, all right, like, am I crazy? Is this real? One thing I posted about recently is like seeing a lot of people not wanting to increase stipends, like very small, patient stipends. Seems crazy. Is this something you're hearing? Is this common?
Very, very split. Now it's coming, like a lot of big pharma, they're creating their own ethics committees to set the stipends, and they will not pay anymore. Which, how ethical is that? So I'm not quite sure what's going on with that, but it's all over the place. And then you've got the patient advocates; they're wanting even more. They're talking about Bitcoin.
Or different
All of these
ways
different
of
things
being reimbursed or compensated. I mean, yeah, it is pretty insane. And have you ever seen an IRB actually reject an ask like from a site? I've never seen it. And there's been some that I was like, wow, this is pretty high. Like we've seen simple blood draw studies with one visit that will, reimburse or compensate up to $200. And then you've got studies with visits that are 2 hours long, infusions, they're getting PKs, and they'll give them $50. There's no consistency across the board, like at all.
Wow.
And
so much for standardization, right?
Well, that's another. So yeah, we can talk about that.
You're going to get to the patients are going to select the trials to be in based off of the stipends.
Well, so yes, you're going to end up with like a weird series of selections, right? Like sites are going to pick the studies that the patients want to be in. The patient's going to pick the studies they want to be in. So eventually, if there's enough competition, it might not be a bad thing, because the bad studies they'll suck unless they decide to fix them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know we're doing science here, but like you still have to make it reasonable, or even, I don't want to say attractive, but at least not a loss or a net loss for patients.
Oh, I know. I mean, how much is a patient giving up to be a part of a trial? That's the big thing. Let's say you go for a 1 hour visit every month or something like that. That's driving, childcare, time off work, all of this stuff. I mean, and there are patients that say they get paid more to go to jury duty than being a part of a trial.
Well, if you have a job, like it almost, unless you're desperate or you happen to have a chronic condition that there's not a good treatment for, or you failed a bunch of times, there's almost no reason to be in a clinical trial. Like I posted this somewhat recently too, like, and we see it, like we kind of end up with like the people who are desperately in need because maybe they don't have insurance, or they don't, otherwise have access to treatment, or people who have so much time that, they can afford to just sit and chill and not worry about, the reimbursement. And the whole middle is sort of missing there.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, do you think that setting stipend levels actually sets the patient populations you're targeting?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. That's fair. I don't know. What do you think?
A lot of patient populations. I mean, have you ever had that thing where a patient calls you the day after their visit and say, "Where's my stipend? I need it."
Oh yeah.
So
especially, we've had them say like, I can't get there unless I know I'm going to have it by the time I leave.
Mm-hmm.
We have patients, especially the ones that are driving from far away, they'll call and be like, I may not have enough gas to get there unless you can pay me in advance, which again is not, not really something we want to do, because that's not how it's supposed to work. But again, you're putting them in a bind.
Yeah, you're getting them in a situation, and that's that whole reimbursement thing. They do have to go out of pocket until you can get them the money back. And if they don't have the money out of pocket, then what are you going to do? So then you go into the whole world of like all of the groups that offer like rides and ride shares and things like that. Where's the balance? Where's the line?
Well, we did find, we can't do this necessarily for every study, but where the sponsors are agreeable, if we'll pay and we'll set up the rides. And, there's a local company here that does it. It works great. Gives them less of a reason to have to say no. But we've seen recently too, like an issue with, the third-party cards, third-party payments. And they're saying like, hey, we can't approve a payment. It might take 2 weeks to approve a payment to a patient. I'm like, hey, cool. They don't want to hear that. Like, and again, some of them, it will limit your ability to actually bring patients in. Some won't mind. It'll be fine. But there are plenty who are like, nah, I can't.
Yeah. So, and then once you start to try to target the diverse populations again, and you're going to go through that, you have to have all these different dynamics. Maybe it is time for some kind of a stipend standardization. Not by trial, but maybe by industry. But the question is, who would own that?
I mean, it doesn't seem that complicated to even, if you can estimate or have a good grasp on how long a visit's going to take, to have some sort of hourly rate. There's a federal reimbursement rate for mileage and all these kinds of other things. Maybe you come up with something like that. And then obviously you've still got mileage on top of that. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard, but
I'm doing some traveling right now, and we're working with NIH, like government grants and things like that. And they have entire panels of per diems based off of the location that you're at, how much they approve you can have. It's already there at NIH. Why can't we just use something like that across the industry? And that way nobody points fingers, nobody's making the decision on a bias level. It's just, okay, this is like kind of like what the IRS says with mileage, this is what NIH says for per diem. This is what every university has to follow anyway. Why don't we just try to follow that as an IRB, as an industry standard?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I feel like there's a lot of things in this industry that don't make sense. They must be benefiting somebody the way they are. But I guess you end up in a world where you may be paying one site $25 stipends and another one $150 stipends, which again seems
at the end.
Yeah, but again, it still seems strange. And again, like the amount that patients being reimbursed may come down to how well a site negotiates, which also seems kind of messed up in a way.
It does, especially when you negotiate, but then you also have to make sure that it's correct in the ICF. And sometimes if you negotiate improperly and it's wrong in the ICF, then you're screwed. Then what are you going to do? You're going to go back and change the ICF? You're going to go back and change the contract?
Well, yeah, and we've seen this, and somebody commented on that thread about it. Because some sponsors will say like, we're not going to pay the difference. If you want to pay it, go ahead. But we're not going to reimburse it, which again seems really short-sighted at $50 a visit or whatever, but sure. But then, you submit it to the IRB. Someone's got to sign off from the CRO or sponsor side. It doesn't match your budget. Then they kick it back. And then you basically have to start the whole thing all over again, and then get everything aligned or explained. It just seems crazy that we can't do simple things.
So I've got an interesting story. Have you ever been shelved by a CRO?
I don't think so. I was trying to think about this. Like, are you talking about like basically like negotiate ourselves out of a study?
Not necessarily, but you negotiate and they say, well, it's too high, we'll escalate to the sponsor. And then they come back and they're like, well, we're not activating new sites at this time. Or we have a budget negotiation or a protocol amendment that's going to hit. So, we're going to hold off on activation until the protocol amendment. And so you sit there like, okay, we're going to wait for you to get back to me. But then at the same time, you get all the newsletters from the study teams knowing that the trial is ongoing right now. And so it feels like there was a dishonesty with the CRO negotiator and you. Like they literally lied to you. They put you on the shelf, kind of kept you hanging.
Yeah.
Because
that's good. I don't know if I've seen that directly. I can think of there was a somewhat recent instance where I think we sent over a budget that was our counter offer, and then we just never heard another peep out of them. So we're like, oh well, I guess it was too much. They didn't even want to counter.
And how long ago was that?
I mean, that was probably 8 months ago, something like that.
It's literally just silence. You like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
I guess that's your answer.
There's too much other stuff going on to like,
And what's funny is a
care
lot
that
of times when that happens, it's because they swapped negotiators and you fell through the cracks.
Yeah, I mean, how much of, and I feel like I missed somebody's podcast or something about this. Like, are those roles being like changed and offshored, or like, those negotiation roles? And I wonder if that has anything to do with it. You get in different time zones and things get complicated.
It can get really complicated. So most negotiations, they'll start you with the junior paper pusher who can just make sure that you're within the bell curve. And then if you do any kind of pushback at all, if you just say, hey, I want more overhead, or hey, I need this, then that junior paper pusher isn't qualified to move it further. So they'll pass you on to another negotiator who's a little experienced, maybe like a contract specialist 2 or something like that. And then if the contract specialist 2 can't get it for you, they'll pass it off to likely an Esquire or a JD. And then that's where you get into the complex contractual stuff, indemnification, the monthly versus quarterly, stuff like that. And then they'll go from the JD and we'll have to escalate this to the sponsor. So they go up to there. So you might find yourself getting passed along based off of how much you push back.
Yeah. And I had somebody reach out to me a while back saying that they had secured some sort of like, it's like a handbook for negotiation from a CRO. And it does say something like, a site would basically have to push back like 6 times in order to reach like their maximum. Which I thought was really interesting. I didn't realize it was so like codified, that's like, we have it. Yeah. I guess that makes sense, but
have you ever seen, and this is a different kind of negotiation, but have you ever seen the manuals that they give car salesmen?
No.
It's very broken down. They know the data analytics. They look at you by demographic. They know how much you're going to push back, how much you can afford, how much to offer you. Same thing with sites. So, they have an entire profile on your site and they have a prediction of what you will accept. And then that is their high level. And they'll just take you everything back down from there.
Everything's such a racket, man. It's crazy.
It's tracked. It's so tracked. And the thing is, it's tracked based off of some really old data. And I mean, really old. So, you've got things in there that are 10 years old that they think are accurate.
Yeah. Well, that's data, right? I mean, it's the past. So.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, and I just posted on this, but they never go back to check if it was right. It's always based off of a contract that was signed and, what was negotiated, but they never validate it at all. So how, this goes back to fair market value and all this wonderful stuff, but it's just insane what they do.
I still can't define fair market value after all this time.
Well, and as far as negotiations go, do you ever feel like if you do push back, then you're somewhat punished by time? Oh, we'll have to escalate to the sponsor.
Yeah. No. It's a conversation we have all the time is like, at what point does it become like the cost benefit analysis sways over to like, okay, stop negotiating and let's just go, because we're going to lose another month. We may lose 6 weeks, like waiting to try to get a few $100s per visit. And at that point, sometimes it is weighing like, okay, how much are we really going to do on this trial? If we're going to enroll a patient or 2, maybe it's not such a big deal. If we think it's going to be high volume, then we may fight a little bit harder because we're going to be out that much more at the end of the day. But yeah, it's definitely not, it's maybe self-imposed, but there's still pressure to like get it done. Because also that clock is ticking against your metrics later. Because, CRO comes back and says, oh, it looks like it takes you, 12 weeks to start up. And I'm like, we can get started up in 4 weeks. Well, yeah, that's because you guys wouldn't approve like a couple of simple line items on the budget. And we ended up going back and forth on them forever. You know.
That's kind of like saying, sites are punished for negotiating properly.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's up, Mitch? Yeah, I know. That again, no, I'm not gonna get on my high horse, but yeah, I got you, Mitch. What's up, Dan? Going back to the last talk about it, how often do you see patients dropping out or not participating because of below stipend or delay in reimbursement? I mean, we've definitely had people say they're not going to come based off of like a delayed reimbursement or otherwise low stipend. I haven't seen people drop out. Generally, usually they kind of know and it doesn't change once they're in. So hasn't been as big of a deal in terms of retention, but I've definitely seen it affect enrollment. I don't know what you've seen, but I mean, it's both. It does happen.
Yep, both. So for one is, when you go to recruit a patient, call them, talk to them, and they're going to say, well, am I going to get paid for my time here? Especially a patient who's already been in a trial. And if you sit there and say, this sponsor doesn't approve a stipend, they'll be like, okay, thank you very much. Call me when you have one that does. There's your recruitment part. But yeah, the other part, and Brad, you're spot on about the gas. We've had patients, they were frustrated with the system. The third-party payers didn't pay. And they're, you guys lied to me. There's a trust issue that was broken. And, you tell them you can withdraw at any time. And we have had patients exercise that. You promised me this, you're not coming through. This is the fourth visit and you owe me like a bunch of money and nobody's paid me. I'm out. It happens.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this last week, but that's why generally if we can, like we try to manage the stipends ourselves, with our own CTMS. I love that there's options out there. I think there should be, especially for sites that don't have that. But otherwise, at least I know, if we screw up, that's on me, not someone that I can't answer for, but generally it's much easier to make sure people are being paid appropriately and on time if we're managing that process. Mitch, you have to link me to this. Trial Value app has developed a calculator to estimate costs for trials and patient reimbursements. I wonder what that's.
That would be pretty awesome.
I want to know more about that. Also, I want to go back to Dan Schnell. Shell, sorry, I added an in. He reached out. Clinical leader is doing they're going to do like a talk, a round table about feasibility and how that might be able to be improved. So if you guys are interested, actually, I think they're looking for some panelists. So if you're interested, you guys should reach out to Dan Shell. I like the content they're putting out.
That's a hot topic.
It is. And actually, I had sat in on, I think one of the scope talks I was in was focused on, feasibility and how to make that better. I mean, frankly, it's ridiculous. Like, I don't understand how many times they have to collect the same data. I feel like it's hard. They already have all the data. It's a matter of just utilizing it, right?
Yeah. And from a legal structure, a legal point of view, it's literally a waste of time, literally. So let's get the process here. You sign a CDA. Okay, we promise to be confidential, which they don't adhere to, right? Even if it's a two-way CDA, guess what? They share your site's information with their database without your permission. And even when they said they wouldn't. And then after you fill out the feasibility, guess what? Nothing happens until you're awarded a trial, right? As soon as you sign that trial award, it says in the contract, everything that was said before you sign this contract is null and void. Now we follow what's here. So there's nothing legally binding about a feasibility.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's just ironic to me that they can't reuse their own data.
Well, yeah, and then there's their repeated work that sites are not paid to do, and that's one thing is.
Have you heard of sites charging to do feasibility? I've actually have heard of that amongst some really big, fairly big institutions. Like
we actually bake that into every single CRPN fee schedule for our sites. So when we get the sites under their master fee schedules, that's one of the first things that we bake in is their feasibilities. So that when sponsor partners or sponsor members enter the network and start asking for feasibilities from sites, we can pay the sites for them because they're under contract.
How often are CROs using this as like pre-award like data to like win a contract, like, you know, which is
That,
also
yep,
that's where it gets a little bit like, okay, I can,
it's hairy.
if there's a true study that I'm eligible, you know, or maybe a good fit for, and I fill out a feasibility and I don't get it, okay, I can accept that to some degree as the cost of doing business. But if it's pre-award and they're using that data to
Yep.
go,
And they
like,
won't even tell you. They'll
Yeah,
go out and
yeah.
get a bunch of feasibilities with the sites and then turn in their RFPs.
yeah, that is where it starts to get a little bit shady, right? Like,
Yeah.
now you're just
'Cause
asking me to do work so that you can win business. And
That's the invisible carrot right there. There is no trial. They're trying to get the RFP. And sometimes they're straightforward. They're like, hey, you know, we don't have this RFP yet. We need you for it. And when we get it, then you'll be on the short list. I mean, there's some that say that. There's others that just collect the data and leave you high and dry.
Well, even then, yeah, there's no guarantee you're going to get it just because you help provide some numbers to help them win it. So here, I'll throw up Dan's info. Yeah, need some panelists, talk about problems and possible solutions sometime in May. His email address is there. For any reason you miss it, you guys can reach out to him on LinkedIn, or even one of us. We're happy to connect you.
Yeah, I do really appreciate what the Clinical Leader does for the industry. They're creating a pretty cool platform. They were the magazine that offered help at SOS. Anyone who wanted to write an article from a site, you talk to Clinical Leader. They've got a lot of really cool stuff going on.
Agree. So let's go back. Something you touched on made me think. Another hot topic I hear a lot about lately is sponsor of choice, being a sponsor of choice. And, you know, I've been asked like a lot, like, what do we do to become a sponsor of choice? Which I think if you just listen, it's probably not hard. But I mean, is this something you're hearing? And what are your thoughts? Like, what's the?
Oh yeah, there's we want to be the sponsor. The funny thing is, the people who are at the big box conferences, the people from the sponsors that say, oh, we want to be the sponsor of choice, kumbaya, we're here to listen to you, they are the worst offenders in real life.
That's why they need to be a sponsor of choice.
I'm pretty sure the marketing and BD people who go to the conferences are not talking to the ClinOps people who are actually doing the bad. Because there's this huge disconnect. Like, I know there are certain sponsors and CROs that when I hear that that's the sponsor or that's the CRO, you have this little piece of you inside that dies because you're like, I know exactly where this is going to go.
All right. But I mean, I guess it's not a bad thing, though. At least they're thinking about how they can become better partners. I mean, I think we're still yet to see any like true movement, but like it's being at least kind of bandied about quite a bit, which
yeah, it's the buzzword of the year, site-centric sponsor of choice. And at least that means that it's desirable. Someone does, they want it. I just haven't seen the actions. So
we'll see. We'll see how bad they actually want it.
I can think of a few sponsors right now that whenever I hear this sponsor's name, I am excited because I know that this is where maybe you get into sponsor of choice. But for me, sponsor of choice is always about a sponsor they're in the game, they're engaging with the site. They don't just pass it off to a CRO and, hands off. They address problems quickly. They're fair. They listen. They have an understanding. And I know one of the sponsors you've had. I can think of one already that's like, boom, yes, it triggers all of the, checks all the boxes. But for you, like, what would a sponsor of choice be for your situation?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I think you pretty much hit on most of the points. I think being communicative, like, and transparent as much as possible, which, I talked about this. I mean, I did another roundtable recently, but yeah, I mean, if you have pre-award, I guess that doesn't really make sense for a sponsor, but and just being straightforward on, what's in their pipeline, what's not, what might be a good fit. And that takes, just person to person connection, and doesn't even have to be super in depth or whatever, like just taking the time to talk to you, not just pass it off. And all you ever hear from is the CRA. And you have no idea what's going on otherwise, which is crazy common. like even the CRA comes in, I'm like, so what's even going on this study? Like how many patients are enrolled? And nobody knows. Nobody can share that information. There's no communication from the sponsor. Nobody knows what's going on. And honestly, just pay on time. That alone
I can't tell you how many case studies I have books of case studies of things that have happened on these sites from the global sponsors and CROs, and pay on. I mean, it's just like an industry. Oh, okay, well,
Yeah, what about a CRO of choice? I mean, I think the concepts are the same, and honestly, those might frankly be more beneficial for sites because obviously a CRO touches a lot of sponsors instead of one sponsor. If they're small, and this is the irony, right? Like the smaller sponsors tend to be, in my experience, better to work with because they are closer to the action, so to speak, and maybe have a little bit more skin in the game.
Yep. The flatter the org chart, the better the responsiveness, the more engaging, that you're not putting yourself in between someone else.
But the downside is though that they probably don't have a huge pipeline. They may not be working across a bunch of therapeutic areas with a bunch of drugs, being developed. They may be fairly small. So while those might be like the best relationships, they have kind of the least reach, as opposed to we've been doing a lot of reaching out to MSLs lately, trying to establish relationships with MSLs. This is a good example, but like these huge companies, like, the Novartises and whatnot, like they're so broken down.
Yep.
That like
even one MSL doesn't talk to the other MSL,
and they only cover like a very small, handful of indications. So it's like, hey, cool, they know us really well, we know them, but they only cover rheumatology and they only cover biologics within rheumatology. And you're like, oh, well, shit, okay, I mean, that's fine, but then I got to go do this 12 more times just within the same company to make sure that we're developing good relationships. And yeah, they don't talk to each other. Sometimes they do. I've been surprised that they'll say let's do a call. I'll bring on.
Yep. I'll pass you off to this other MSL. Yeah. And going back to Dan's question about CROs.
Yeah. Sorry, I got off the rails there.
No, he's right. I mean, Dan, everyone's trying to crack this nut right now. If you look at all of the big global CROs, they've all opened a site relationships branch dedicated to creating site alliances. And there are, some of them, they're getting better at least triaging the problems that are happening all the time. We'll just say that. Like they'll listen and they can get things fixed, but they just can't get things fixed at a like 80% accuracy. So they're really good firefighters, but they haven't prevented the fires.
But I have had some CROs where we've had good ongoing lengthy relationships where, they have some of these do have the sort of site relationship roles, and that's great. But I feel like even those have sort of sometimes peter out over time and can be challenging. But even that is a really big step towards, I think, becoming like a good partner, right? Like just knowing what the heck's going on. Otherwise, you might just be waiting around for a feasibility to hit your inbox. So to have a direct contact, and those aren't easily scalable things, which is kind of something else I wanted to talk about, which I think was actually a post from Dan Shell about the rise of networks, and if site networks are the answer to sort of maybe increase standardization, make things better for the industry. Did you see this article? I know Dan did not write it. I think it was actually written by the dude over at Atlas Clinical Research, which I think is a site network. I thought that was an interesting take, and you already kind of hinted at the idea of standardization. Do you think it's realistic to have operational standardization across the network of sites, especially if they're not wholly owned?
Okay, let's go back to house construction, independent contractors, right? There's always a code, right? This is built up to code. So that's an example of a bunch of independent contractors who come together and say, okay, we all agree that this is the way to build it. But how many times are houses built outside of code? Just because, there's local code, there's all this different thing. So I don't know. I don't know if you're going to be able to do like a complete standardization across all sites, because they're just all going to be different. You've got your giant networks, your mom and pop, community sites. You've got academia. I mean, I think that's kind of what GCP was trying to do with Alcoa and things like that for documentation. But I don't know if we're going to get to that on an operational level.
Yeah, well, I mean, even GCP. So the link is up here if you guys want to check it. I thought it was a good article, at least thought-provoking. Not sure if I agree or not, but I think, again, it's at least makes you think a little bit. Obviously, I think we need some additional standardization. Science should be replicable, right? Isn't that part of the whole thing? And if, we're doing things so insanely differently from one another, like that seems kind of against the whole idea. But I don't know that the idea of, trying to, I just don't know. We see it again. We work in 2 clinics. They're different. They operate differently. We have to also accommodate them differently if we want them to succeed. Sometimes wildly differently depending on the context. So I feel like that's challenging. It could be challenging to try to cookie cutter the clinical trial site process. And from the article, the crux of the issue is that there's often a disconnect between the priorities of a clinical site and the rest of the clinical research industry. Yeah, that's probably true. Ironically enough, as a strategic response to these multifaceted industry challenges, some sites have therefore chosen to consolidate into research site networks. So I still wonder if that's good or bad.
I mean, you're going to get to a point where you can have SOPs to kind of keep guidance. But again, everything is going to have its quirk based off of where you're at.
Yeah. No, you're right. And Mitch,
I like what Mitch said.
Can have standardization to a degree. Each site will have uniformity in principle, but you'll have variability between sites. Without a bespoke site and patient recruitment approach, you aren't adding value. Yeah, no, that's true. And again, if we want diversity, then you've got to act with diversity as well, right? Like they're not all going to have the same approach. But I feel like, unfortunately, though, the bespoke part is pretty broad. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is sort of more personalized across site operations. But again, neither here nor there. I'm curious to see what the next 3 to 5 years bring for these site networks, especially the newer ones.
Well, wait till, because we all wonder how those exit strategies are going to be. A lot of the, big PE and VC ones, how are they going to exit? What are they going to do?
Yeah,
that's the big question.
That's unclear. And again, it probably depends on what you think. Well, who's the buyer, right? Like we've seen CROs buy site networks. Now, depending on who you believe, whether or not it's been successful. I hear from people who work at these that it's messy and that a lot of these CROs have trouble even like getting their own studies onboarded, which shouldn't be surprising, but is still a little bit hilarious. But then you've got the CEO of, CEOs saying, it's a huge part of our business are these sites and site network. So definitely believe everything a CEO tells you.
I still have my hat in the game for hospital systems. I think that that's the one team that could compete with CROs buying out these site networks is actual hospital systems making it part of healthcare.
Well, I mean, look, I'll say this, like I've drastically changed my approach having worked with a hospital system now. And it's been a great partnership and it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think that they will act as like CROs even or infringe on that? Or you think just become more networked together?
Because if you look at the history of the hospital systems and the investors that own hospital systems, like, the Saint systems and all, they've already got a national, regional, like, there are people here in Illinois, they're owned by people in Wisconsin. It's the hospital systems are already regional, and it's just a matter of calling research and other specialization in your hospital system. And then when, like, we're talking about DCT guidance, healthcare integration, going into HCP offices, it only makes sense on a logical level for hospitals to start offering research, or these big giant PE firms to offer research as a part of their healthcare systems, especially with the stringencies on data and the databases of hospitals and who owns the data. I think I wouldn't count that out.
Well, to your point, I mean, I think I've thought about this here. Like, I'm in a system that covers a lot of the state. I mean, just operating out of this one system gives you so much reach and so many resources. Like, there's clinics all over the place associated with the system. So again, it seems like a good strategy. Now it's easier said than done. There's a lot of, when I started this, I wanted to stay away from systems because I had bad experiences with them. And just like you talked about, usually the flatter it is, the easier it is to get things done. So walking back into a system was a little bit, I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure this is going to work. But again, if you find the right partner, I think it's huge. Especially one that'll let you do what you need to do. But again, I think that may be easier said than done to find.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you never know, like when they change the guard, you got a new leader, new CEO or something, then everything could be in jeopardy. You are depending on someone to continue. They may have a wild hair and think they could do it better themselves.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And that's, I don't think that's an uncommon sentiment, especially when they see that, it can be profitable and very profitable. It can be lucrative even, if done correctly. But once people start seeing that, they're like, oh, I can do that. And I'm like,
I want a bigger piece of that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like that, more of that should be ours. Look at how much we're doing.
Yep. The story of almost every site we've ever gone through.
Yeah. And, again, it's poorly understood. I mean, the whole process is poorly understood even by PIs that do research. And then you want to bring in administrators and hospital systems and legal teams and IT and, corporate governance and everyone else who's got no idea what they're even looking at. So it's an uphill battle. I think it's a good approach, and I would like to lean more into, the system level approach, but it's a lot of hurdles to jump.
Yeah. Well, and trying to make everyone happy. And it all depends on the hospital system.
That's part of it too. And you oftentimes find yourself doing things that making decisions you may not otherwise make because you've got to keep everybody happy. Pretty soon doctors start coming to you with, these like their relationships that are bad studies with bad sponsors, but you can't hardly say no because you want to keep that PI happy, and the system's full. There's 300, providers in the system here, just in the state. So that adds up.
So I wanted to ask you a question, Brad, and it's been a burning question. Here's my one burning question. I'm sure Edie's listening. We'll talk about DCT, right? And I've talked to sites. I've been in a research department embedded into a healthcare system on a campus. And let's talk about like at site visits where patients go to that site where the records are, where that happens, versus a satellite site versus a tandem visit.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Here we go. But seriously, okay. I know for a fact, because I've been on both sides, sponsors saying we don't want satellite sites. That opens up a whole can of worms. You're going to store the IP somewhere different. We have to monitor, validate everything. You want like your mothership to be where you store the records and store the IP. But when you go to these campuses like Mayo Clinic or big hospital systems or whatever it might be, their community center that's got the blocks and blocks of healthcare, your research department is at a physical address, a physical location. But you've got your CRCs being little runners going into the doctor's offices across the street, going down the block, blocks away, 9-minute drive, you're over on the other side of the town, whatever it might be.
Right.
But you're not establishing a satellite site because you're performing what they call tandem visits. You're just going to the doctor's office, getting the job done, coming back and writing down on the source. Or you're dispensing from your site, go to the doctor's office, dispense, collect blood, whatever, and then come back to your mothership and process it. So that's a tandem visit. That doesn't trigger a sub-site or satellite site. You're in a hospital system. So you perform tandem visits, right?
We do.
So it's pretty much you have your mothership and you go out to all the doctor's offices, do the work, and then come back into the department.
We may, yeah, and it's a mix, across the two. 'Cause, yeah, we have a central like clinic here, and then obviously all the different physician clinics. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to drag somebody around and to do it in their clinic and bring it back here. So yeah.
So, I mean, you're doing this. It's just part of the department. That's your
Sure.
logistic right there. So we're talking about standardization, and that's why it kind of came up. But there's no way that your department, with what you do, could be standardized because of the logistics you have to face from tandem visits based off of a major giant hospital that's embedded, or an academic university, or even a community clinic.
Yeah.
So when you look at the logistics behind a tandem visit and all the things you have to do between sample collection, blood draws, IP dispense, everything, and then you compare that to the FDA guidance for DCT performing things in the HCP's office, which, by the way, this was a note from SCRS when they wrote the letter. They said, we've got many sites that are sitting here saying this is literally no different from the logistics that we do every day. And
Right.
you're making this big deal about it. So when you look at it that way, I mean, aren't we kind of already doing tandem visit decentralized-ish things at the site level?
Yeah, and we should be more, I think. We should be more open to it. The only like good, I don't know, it sounds cynical. It's not really the way I intend to come off, but like, I think the only good thing about that guidance is that it may open the door for more things like that, and make it more acceptable, because I can't, even now, I still have to like explain it a couple of times to a CRA who comes in and they're like, do you have satellite sites? I'm like, well, no.
Nope.
It's a location on site. It's a location listed under the one site, right? Like it's not an independent site, or a satellite. And sometimes, again, I have to have that conversation like very thoroughly many times over. And I'm like, this is not unique or complicated, like it's very simple.
Nope, don't overthink it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which happens. But yeah, you look at that guidance and you're like, yeah, most of it is already happening. Where I don't love that you're letting people do things without any responsibility or delegation. So basically, it seems like nobody's responsible for the standard of care things that happen at another clinic. And I mean, again, to me, it's debatably not standard of care to get a physical exam once a month. Whatever. You can argue the semantics, but now they're on a task log. Who's responsible for that? I mean, I assume it's still the PI, but then you don't have any.
Site. Yep.
Yeah, but then you don't have any burden of training or like having to tell somebody, the finer details, because as standard as it is, a lot of it's not really standard, right?
Well, so I think it's based off of the state licensure, right? So if you're a PA or an NP or an MD, DO, whatever, and you are licensed by the state of wherever you live to perform a physical examination, then the state covers that licensure, the accreditation. It's not like you're going to,
But if that's the case, then why put anyone on a delegation log? Like, other than the PI, because whoever does a physical exam is going to be somebody who's a medical professional that's licensed to do that anyway. So why train them and delegate them? They're just going to do a physical exam.
Well, you could delegate the physical exam, the performance of the physical exam, but then what would not be standard of care would be the recording of the source, right? Because that's very research related. So you could have one group actually doing the service, like they wouldn't even know a difference. It's like another patient walked in their office. But then you'd have the research specialists being the ones delegated to perform research activities, which is assurance of the protocol and recording of the source.
Okay. Well, and is that delineated well in?
Yeah, it's
FDA
in the guidance. It talks about state
Okay.
licensures. So anything standard care.
Debatably, if they you still need somebody from the research team to be recording that, or
Yes.
it's not. They don't just goes into their EMR. You go pull it out later.
Nope. You still have to have complete oversight. But the person doing the recording, and this happens a lot at the time with like hands-on Like joint count is the perfect example.
Yeah.
I love joint count because, that poor physician, if that physician had to record and do joint counts, it would take 3 times the time because they have to, be physically engaging with the patient, but they can dictate to a delegated authority the recording of the source.
Not unlike any doctor's office visit, meaning there may be a scribe or a nurse or someone else doing the actual documentation of what the physician is doing or conversation they're having.
And that's a perfect example. So it's already an accepted practice.
Right? Yeah.
So there's
and again, I don't disagree. My concern is that the same thing will happen that happens with every piece of FDA guidance, is that I feel like the intent is completely lost, and then pretty soon sponsors and CROs sort of make up their own way of interpreting it to the point to where it's completely lost, like the spirit of what it's trying to accomplish. And then all it does is put more burden on sites to prove or disprove, or whatever the case may be, whatever new made up process they built around it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the crux of that entire guidance is going to be the fact that it has to be baked into an IRB approved protocol.
Yeah.
That's going to be where, and that's where like the sites that do tandem visits, that's where you're going to go from one conversation, like where your satellite site, to the other one, like, well, was this approved in the IRB protocol?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that part kind of, I don't want to say it bothered me, but it made me even more skeptical that it's going to be adopted like at scale, because I don't see a lot of risky sponsors rolling the dice,
Nope.
And even with the tools available that are, again, debatably being used in a way that's perfectly acceptable, sponsors still don't want to do it a little bit different. So that part makes me like, well, okay, we don't get to pick. We just have to do it. If it doesn't say that we can do it this way, then we're not allowed to, even if it works, or even if it makes sense for that study. So it ultimately still relies on the willingness for sponsors to
interpretation.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, prime example, electronic record, right? For clinical research was published in 2008.
Yeah.
And over half of the sites that I talk to are still doing paper only.
Yeah.
So just because this guidance comes out and says it's okay to do DCT, we won't see it being adopted at mass for years, decades.
Well, and frankly, even if it's good for patients, they're not going to do it unless it costs less and gets things done faster. And right now, that's not 100% clear. That definitely not clear that it costs less.
Yeah.
There's a lot of examples of it, something that's good for patients, but just doesn't move the needle enough financially to really be worthwhile.
I don't know about you, man, but every time I see the word convenience or organic in front of something, there's a higher dollar sign next to it. You go to a convenience store, you go to, anything that says it's convenient, like let's say you go to like some convenience store, everything is going to have marked up prices versus like a grocery store or versus anything. Convenience yields cost because it's justified.
Yeah. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for the convenience, right?
Exactly. So what is Sarah saying?
I was gonna pull it up here. So I think this goes back to our standardization and hospital network. So she was previously in a large hospital network, and we're far, far away. So much red tape and no uniformity within the network. Research operates so differently from hospital. It's difficult to implement. It can be done, but it's very slow. And I would echo that. I mean, even when I worked at the university and other people who've worked there, I mean, every department operates differently. So yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult, to do that. And, tandem, this is a whole nother conversation. Are they listed on the 1572?
It's tandem visits, Sarah, not tandem locations. The whole idea is just the visit. But on the 1570, it all depends. It depends on how it was structured. Are we looking at an HCP? Are we looking at a sub-I? Are we looking at an assistant? So yes, main campus can be listed on the 1572. Where are all list the locations that the patients are being seen. So you list one address, right? That's it. But you also list your home base. You list where you're from. Like that's where your contract is set. So That's
And I
that's
think
the
under the
difference.
current model, like we're putting those on 1572s. If someone's getting
Mm-hmm.
a physical exam in a location or getting blood drawn in a location that's not this one, it's being added. Now again, I think the conversation is that do they need to be in the future with the new guidance?
Yep.
It seems like they are trying to push for no. Again, it just seems so weird to not document some things. Well, I guess that's not true though. It's just being kind of shifted over maybe to that task log, because don't locations have to be listed
Yeah.
on this new log?
And they've got scenarios like, let's say they had a case study where a patient went on vacation, right? But they were due for a blood draw. It was just a PK blood draw. So they went through like a LabCorp national network, and they were off on vacation. They found the closest LabCorp, got their blood drawn, and then they went off. So does that mean that LabCorp blood draw place 1,000 miles away has to go on a documentation?
Well, and Mitch points out, I think, the like immediate
Yeah.
thing that you're like,
Good
what?
job.
Like, you have a home health visit that's not on a 1572. And I've always wondered then who cares? Then why put any location on a 1572? Because anything can happen anywhere at this point. And that's okay if that's the road we're going down. But I feel like there's no consistency. Again,
Nope.
people come on site. Go through the regulatory startup process, and how beat up do you get over every? I mean, if we have a comma in the wrong place, we have to redo a 1572.
Yep.
And I'm like, good God, that's
The
insane.
stringency
And
is
so,
crazy.
and then to be like, well, yeah, but stuff can just happen at people's houses, and it doesn't matter. We don't have to like be specific about that. I'm like, okay, well, again, like just pick a way to be, and let's do it that way.
Yep. Well, and that's where I was getting at. We have so much scrutiny, try to validate, do all this stuff, but then we kind of just let finance go on the wayside. It's like, put all of our energy in operations and regulatory. And I mean, this is probably one of the worst financial processes and systems I've ever seen in an industry.
And why is that? Just because they can get away with it?
Maybe there's no guidance around it, no regulatory guidance. Maybe there's no big brother, no assurance, no accountability. I don't know.
Do you think that the sponsors or CROs who are like more invested in paying their sites fairly and timely are more successful? Or do you think they have better? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if there's like I wish there was some data around that.
So there's a really cool case study out of the UK. The NHS, the National Health Systems in the UK, they mandate it that if you do any work in the UK, you have to have late fees in your CTAs. There are late fees in CTAs right now in the UK.
Well, they have they have like a whole standard sheet for payments, like for everything.
Well, they tried that a few years ago, and that didn't go. They're still back to negotiating rates. Gotcha. They don't have like flat rate, all rates across the UK doing this. But they said it's lobbying, it's price fixing, it's all this stuff. But they still have the requirement to have percentage late fees. If you're late on payments, you're required to pay, I think it's like 2% above the market cap of some bank or something. But you look at the accountability, and from what we've seen, like our UK sites in the CRPN network, they get paid pretty seriously. And guess what? The sites, they just click it right there. They're much more successful.
It makes sense. I just wonder if that's like at least there's like a good business case for, doing a better job. Because at the end of the day, I'm convinced nothing is going to change unless it's just a extremely good business case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to have a loud enough voice. You can make some flashes in the pans here and there, but it's such a problem.
Yeah.
That you've got to be persistent.
Yeah. Just, be persistent about everything all the time, and you'll be a successful site.
Well, it takes a lot of energy to be persistent, and I'm sure you know that. You have to put a lot of energy into it.
Yeah, understatement. Cool, man. Well, we're coming up on noon Central, so anything else you want to get out there before we hit the road?
I mean, we got 1 year to SOS. I'm starting to think about things, aren't we? I mean, are you nervous yet? I'm nervous for you.
I'm getting there. Hey man, I'm excited to have people come check out Oklahoma City, and it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this will be a good season for it.
We'll see. we'll see. I think it'll be good. Hopefully we'll have a date solidified here over the next couple of weeks and have some more information. But yeah, I am stoked about it, but more work to do, man.
It doesn't do itself. We know that.
It never ends.
We've got this.
Well, very good. Well, you're out next week because you'll be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll try to actually plan a show in advance and have a guest. That's a novel idea, isn't it? Maybe I'll try that.
I mean, I'm sure if you did one LinkedIn post and said, "Who wants to be on Note to File Live?" you'd probably have like 50 people. There's
a backlog I need to reach out to, and I've just been kind of winging it. But yeah, nope, sounds good, man. So we'll miss you next week. Have fun. You're gonna be in what, Detroit?
Yep, be in Detroit. Gonna activate another site. So
nice. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back next week. And yeah, take it easy, guys.